This podcast and the following message is brought to you by Gorilla, the new limited event series from Showtime about a young, educated couple fighting against social injustice. From Academy Award winner John Ridley. Gorilla, every Sunday at 9 p.m. Download the Showtime app now to start your free trial.
From WBUR Boston and NPR, I'm Tom Ashbrook, and this is On Point. Last week, conservative political commentator Ann Coulter had her talk at UC Berkeley canceled. The reason, security risk. Now it's rescheduled. But since January, the debate around free speech in the college campuses has just become hotter, more fiery, violent even, with student protests forcing universities to cancel speeches by conservative guests, courts intervening. Are these students being too sensitive, as the right claims? Too ready to trample free speech, or nobly standing up to fight? This hour on Point: free speech, resistance, and the American college campus now. You can join us on air or online, where this conversation is always on who's right here. Join us anytime at onpointradio.org or on Twitter and Facebook at On Point Radio. Here, go back to February. This is Berkeley. Students protesting against Milo Yiannopoulos speaking on that campus. And he didn't come. He went on YouTube, posted a video after his speech was canceled, called the protest hypocritical. Here was Milo.
They won't allow students to listen to differing points of view. They're absolutely petrified by alternative visions of how the world ought to look, and people with arguments and fact and reason that don't conform to the crazy social justice left vision of the universe.
Okay, we're talking about Milo Yiannopoulos and Ann Coulter and Richard Spencer and Charles Murray. There has been a lot going on and a lot of concern over what it means for free speech. Students saying, we've got to do this. We're standing up for what's right here. Critics saying you're trampling the First Amendment. Joining me first today from Washington is Steve Kolowitz, senior reporter for the Chronicle of Higher Education. He's been reporting on issues of free speech and protest on college campuses. Steve, welcome to On Point.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me.
What's going on? Why all this now?
The election of Donald Trump has sort of raised the stakes for campus protests. It's activated a lot of students. There are a number of campus speakers who have risen to prominence on President Trump's coattails, Milo Yiannopoulos for one, Richard Spencer for another, and some speakers who have been on the circuit for a long time and have a long history of clashing with campus protesters, such as Ann Coulter and Charles Murray, are seeing more students coming out and protesting their speeches, which are seen as part of the same impending force that college students see closing in on liberal politics in America.
You've got conservatives calling them snowflakes, saying they can't take the heat of political discourse and debate. You've got students coming out very strongly and saying, no, we don't want messages here that they say are, racist or sexist or fascist. I mean, they'll come out and say, we're fighting for the future of this country. Can you walk us through these incidents, if you'd be good enough, Steve? I mean, I guess it starts with Milo. What happened there?
Well, Milo has been speaking on college campuses for more than a year. There was an incident.
This is the former senior editor at Breitbart News, very alt-right guy, British guy.
That's right. He's referred to himself as an internet troll in real life, and the description matches. His style is sort of right-wing insult comic. He's very provocative. He tries to get a reaction,
he'll say just about anything. There was this video clip that turned even conservatives against him. He said a sexual relationship between a 13-year-old boy and adult men and women is perfectly consensual and a positive experience, or could be. I mean, so he's had critics from all over the place, and very, very politically fiery. What happened?
There have been a couple incidents with Milo. One happened at the University of Washington on Inauguration Day when there were protests outside a talk that he had scheduled at a university venue. Protesters prevented Milo supporters, people who were holding tickets, from getting into the venue. and the presence of security also created kind of a log jam, and there was a lot of chaos outside the venue. That event went on as planned. The venue was half full as a result of the protests. But unfortunately, there was some violence outside of that venue, and the wife of a man who was apparently a Milo supporter ended up shooting and gravely injuring a man who was there to protest against Milo. So that was one incident, and then shortly after that, Milo appeared at Berkeley, and the talk was canceled at the last minute, and there were outside agitators who led what ended up being a violent protest, and you and everybody in the country, including the president, saw property burning and chaos at Berkeley.
And then we go to March, and we had the incident with Charles Murray at Middlebury College in Vermont. Right. Here's a little bit of sound of protest there. Charles Murray, now you go way back, he wrote the Bell Curve a couple of decades ago, arguing that differences in intelligence account for a lot of class stratification in American life. Intelligence partly genetic, there may be genetic differences between the races. What was the student complaint there? What happened at Middlebury?
Well, what happened at Middlebury is that Charles Murray was invited to speak on campus in an event that was co-sponsored by the Political Science Department. There was a lot of debate in the run-up to Dr. Murray's appearance there. The college tried to prepare everybody as well as they could to have a smooth event, but when Dr. Murray took the stage, students in the crowd stood up and faced away from him and began to chant such that it was impossible for him to continue to speak. He was then whisked away to an undisclosed location on campus where the talk was put on as sort of a conversation between Dr. Murray and a political science professor at the college, and was videotaped with the intention of releasing the videotape later. And then on their way to a car outside of that venue, some protesters caught up with them, and there was a physical altercation, and the professor, a liberal professor, Allison Stanger at Middlebury, ended up having her hair pulled and her neck twisted and ended up in a neck brace. So that one got pretty ugly at the end there.
Pretty rough and physical there. And then we come to Richard Spencer. Now, this was at Auburn University, and this one happened, but there was a lot of turmoil before it came off.
That's right. So Richard Spencer has kind of in the mold of Milo Yiannopoulos.
Straight-up white supremacist, unvarnished.
Yeah, white supremacist, hero of the alt-right, leads a pro-white nationalist advocacy group, and he, in the mold of Milo, has been billing himself as a dangerous speaker, too hot for campuses. He's very combative in his style, very confrontational, really feeds off of people protesting him and tries to draw that out of college students on campuses. And so Auburn University tried to cancel an event with Mr. Spencer there, citing safety concerns similar to the worries that Berkeley has now expressed with respect to Ms. Coulter's speech. But a federal judge granted Mr. Spencer an injunction that prevented the university from canceling the speech, and it went ahead as planned. There were protests outside that venue, and it got contentious in some cases, but they were largely peaceful in the end.
And then we come to Ann Coulter. This story is not finished. We're kind of in the middle of it, but remind us there, and everybody kind of knows Ann Coulter, a real bomb thrower. But where does that stand with Berkeley?
She's been. I remember back in the middle of the Bush years, she had to dodge a pie that was thrown at her on the college campus. But she's still at it. And earlier this spring, a pair of conservative student groups at UC Berkeley invited her to speak on campus. A talk was scheduled for April 27th, which is this Thursday. But about a week beforehand, university administrators canceled the talk, saying they were concerned about violent protests erupting, a la the Milo Yiannopoulos incident.
Yep.
And a day later, the university said that it could accommodate Ms. Coulter's talk after all, but on a different day, May 2nd, and in a venue where they were confident that the venue could be secured. Ms. Coulter rejected this offer and vowed to appear on campus as scheduled on Thursday. And in the meantime, some of the students who invited Ms. Coulter to campus are suing the university, saying that unreasonable barriers and conditions are being put in front of them. The lawsuit alleges that Berkeley has systematically and intentionally suppressed constitutionally protected expression, and the university says that's ridiculous. That's been working overtime this semester to try to accommodate these speakers.
Steve, I've just got one more minute with you. We can see the problem there. You've described two different views of the college kind of experience. And one is about colleges being a place to you learn how to tolerate and engage in debate. And there's another view as well, though. What is that that's driving here?
Well, there's another view that says, in the case of these speakers that we're talking about, that these are not scholars. These are not people who are presenting rigorous research, that they are there simply to provoke protests, and that a university or a college campus is just not a place that should be a platform for that level of argument. That university should host speakers who have some standing and who present arguments that would fly in the classroom.
And students ready to essentially go into combat, at least campus style, to say no to that. Steve Kolowich with the Chronicle of Higher Education, thank you so much for kicking us off today. This is On Point. We'll be right back. I'm Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point. We're talking this hour about free speech and the American college campus. Whose voices can be heard, whose voices are being rejected, resisted, and the debate over what is right here. It has been loud. Here was Middlebury College in March. Charles Murray was set to speak when students began chanting. Here's a little bit of those chants.
Charles Murray, go away! Racist, sexist, anti-gay! Charles Murray, go away! Racist, sexist.
Charles Murray, go away! Racist, sexist, anti-gay. At Berkeley, Milo Yiannopoulos ended up not speaking there. Jose Diaz, president of the group that invited him, the UC Berkeley College Republicans, told CNN back in February he wasn't surprised by the violent outcome of that resistance.
That just underscores what we already know to be here at UC Berkeley, and that is it's a very intolerant, progressive, left-wing culture that is not hospitable to conservative students.
And you've had criticism coming down on the protesters from all kinds of corners. Here was Bill Maher, Friday, liberal-ish, libertarian-ish television host, comedian, defended Ann Coulter after her speech then at UC Berkeley was canceled. Here he was.
This goes on all over the country on campuses. They invite someone to speak who's not exactly what liberals want to hear, and they want to shut her down. I feel like this is the liberals' version of book burning. Yeah. And it's got to stop.
The liberals' version of book burning. But here's a student who was there, an organizer at Middlebury College, Elizabeth Dunn. She told Burlington, Vermont's WPTZ News why she protested Charles Murray's visit.
I personally felt as if my community was sending me the message that I did not belong, like as a woman and as a person of color.
And she was ready to go out and say, no, we don't want this message here. We pulled together people who are thinking about this from a bunch of different angles, and I want to invite them in right now. Heather McDonald joins us from New York. She's a fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Her speeches at Claremont McKenna and UCLA were met with protests not so very long ago. Her latest piece in the Wall Street Journal headline, those snowflakes, and that's the epithet being thrown at these protesters have chilling effects even beyond the campus. Heather McDonald, thank you very much for being with us from New York.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it.
With us from Washington is Jonathan Chait. He's a writer for New York Magazine. His latest book is Audacity, How Barack Obama Defied His Critics and Created a Legacy That Will Prevail. Jonathan Chait, welcome. Welcome back to On Point.
Hi.
And with us from Berkeley, California is Mukund Ratti. He's a student at the University of California Law School. He helped organize the protests against Milo Yiannopoulos' speech. He wrote a piece about that headlined, Berkeley students should organize against Milo Yiannopoulos. I guess that makes sense. He's a member of the student group Berkeley Against Trump. Mukund Ratti in Berkeley, California, thank you very much for being with us.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
Universities have been seen for a long time as a place where ideas are hashed out in debate. Why have you organized protests to close down speeches?
So I actually don't think that's an accurate description of the protest against Milo Yiannopoulos. On that day, on February 1st in Berkeley, over 2,000 students came out to show that they want their campus to be a place where the politics of solidarity are strong. Many of them had different intentions. Some wanted to shut the speech down, some wanted to demonstrate, and others wanted to send a message to people across the country that we don't have to be scared of right-wing provocateurs like Milo Yiannopoulos and the movement that he represents. So it's helpful to contextualize the uprising in Berkeley in terms of what's going on nationally, beginning with the election of Donald Trump and continuing for months after that, which has been the rise of a far right-wing movement, some of them open white supremacists, who have begun to see Berkeley as a kind of battleground that they can attend, they can speak, they can be violent, as happened on April 15th in Berkeley. And so the importance of organizing protests is not simply to shut down this or that speech, but to organize a movement, the one that's based on solidarity, that will defend oppressed people, and that will make sure that campuses continue to be places where we can have open dialogue and where people can develop politically.
Do you think Milo should have spoken? Do you think he should have spoken at Berkeley?
Well, the decision to shut it down occurred after a small group of people used the black bloc tactics to break windows and start fires. I am against, as a socialist and as someone who thinks that free speech is very important for our side in terms of being able to advocate our politics, I actually think free speech is incredibly important and that the university has very little business in deciding who gets to speak on campuses.
Do you think Milo should have spoken at Berkeley?
I don't think Milo should have been invited to the. I mean,
do you think he should have spoken once invited?
He should not be stopped from speaking by the university. And the question, the legal question when a university is considering whether someone should be allowed to speak is whether that person crosses the line from engaging in dialogue into provoking and inciting violence or carrying out violence. Milo actually pushes that line. The university knew before he spoke that Milo was planning to out undocumented students on campus and encourage his supporters to go after them, to report them to the authorities, and to carry out violence against them. This is something that he's done before at past speeches. So he actually does cross the line, or potentially cross the line, into inciting violence. Notably, even though the university had this information and even though it contacted the Berkeley College Republicans, neither the university or that group considered that dangerous enough to stop the speech. Whether or not they should have, I think, is, at least for our side, beside the point. Our role should not be to ask the state to defend us. Our role has to be to defend ourselves. And organizing protests, showing people that there are people who will defend them and who are interested in building a movement is definitely part of that.
But I mean, you were arm in arm or what you know, it seems to me you're being slightly disingenuous. I understand what you're saying, but it seems to me that the point was to not have Milo speak in the end. I know there was resistance to the ideas and rejection of that, but are you really being candid here? Or didn't you have fellow students who were out wanting him not to speak?
Again, I think that we're talking about a group of 2,000 people. I think there were many different ideas in that protest about what exactly should happen. There were debates beforehand about whether or not we should ask the university to shut down the speech. I and many other students think that we can't trust the state to regulate our free speech in a way that will be consistent. And, I mean, to be frank, the University of California at Berkeley actually has a long history of shutting down speech that's based on the politics of solidarity. So the current conversation around university free speech is about whether or not universities are attacking conservative speakers. There's actually a much longer history at Berkeley, particularly, of universities attacking left-wing speakers. So, for example, in the fall of 2016, the university shut down a student course that was called Palestine, a Settler Colonial Analysis. This was actually an opportunity for students to engage in serious intellectual discussion of a very important political issue. And it was canceled after the university was pressured by the Israeli government and by outside Zionist organizations. 2 hours after one of these organizations, the AMCHA initiative, sent the university a letter, the class was canceled for violating bureaucratic policies which were not stated on the DECAL website.
Mukunradi, stand by there in Berkeley. We've got that story. We've got stories right in front of us, even more recent. I take your point. You can look at this from a couple of different angles. You're sort of in the direct action crowd. Heather McDonald, you hear how Mukun looks at this. On the other hand, other students have been straight up. We heard the chant there in Middlebury College, Charles Murray, go away, racist, sexist, anti-gay. Go away was the operative phrase there, and he ultimately did. What do you see going on here, Heather?
Well, that effort was directed at me as well. The goal of the students at the Claremont colleges was to shut it down, shut my speech down, and they were quite explicit about it. And it's not just a question of shutting down my free speech rights. I can handle that, but the act of power, just brute power against their fellow students to prevent them from hearing a different point of view or interacting with a speaker that had been invited. I was invited by the Claremont a department within Claremont, is really an extraordinary, I think, abuse of power. And it is, of course, as you say, the case that the Berkeley riots were in the name of shutting down that speech, and 100 faculty had signed a petition saying that Milo shouldn't speak. And after the riots, there were several faculties that went on email to their campus fellow faculty members and justified the violence. A professor of French lauded the Black Bloc anarchists for using, as she said, violence very sparingly, destroying just enough property to obtain the cancellation of the speech. So there is, from the faculty itself, backing for the idea that one group of students has the right to decide what another group of students should be allowed to hear.
And it gets rough out there. Here's sound from a fight that broke out between a couple of students at Auburn University. This was April 18th, over a speech by self-proclaimed white nationalist leader Richard Spencer. And, of course, he ultimately spoke. The court ordered that speech should be allowed to go ahead. Jonathan Jade, how do you see what's unfolded here?
Well, I think you see, as you mentioned before, a wide array of repressive tactics that are unfolding mostly on campus by people on the far left who don't respect the right of their political opponents to express ideas. And this has been going on pretty heavily for a few years. You've seen it in the wave of disinvitations of campus speakers who are seen as being ideologically suspect and not fit to speak. And the important thing is that they range from the far right, which is in some ways the easiest case to defend by the people who are suppressing them, because it's not easy to defend Milo Yiannopoulos. But even to the center right and the center left. Because the premise that people who
Condoleezza Rice and so on.
Yeah, Christine Lagarde, center-left head of the IMF. Mm-hmm. The premise is that people who are deemed racist don't have a right to speak because their speech inherently reduces the right of self-expression of people who are oppressed. But the problem is when you give a community the right to determine that someone else is racist, they make that determination on their own. They take upon themselves to decide who's going to be shut down. Then what limits are there on this power? You can extend this label in unreasonable ways. There are people who argue that Hillary Clinton is racist. And you could easily extend that logic to her. because of course it's a matter of debate and perspective. And liberalism has an answer to this, which is that we should grant people political rights and allow the political marketplace to sort it out. The left has a different answer. The left's answer, the illiberal left's answer, is that there's an inherent conflict between the political rights of the oppressed and the oppressor, and one necessarily comes at the expense of the other. And to shut down oppressive speech, it creates more rights for the oppressed. And I think you're just seeing them put that theory into action.
What if, Jonathan, we've heard this articulated by students, Mukund comes close to this from Berkeley, but we've heard others say, look, we're defending the society. We see a threat, a danger to society here, fascism or whatever, and we're out there, we're on the front lines. Easy to sit back and talk about freedom of speech, but you heard Mukund, he says that ultimately he thinks some of these speakers would actually close down the university. He's defending that zone of freedom against a clear and present danger.
Well, it's not a clear and present danger. It's his supposition of what the speaker was going to say, and he was arguing that it should be shut down based on their suspicion of what they thought he was
or opposed, certainly vigorously
going to say. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, and I think he also was melding together two very different kinds of responses. A vigorous protest against his ideas, registering dissent in opposition to his speech, I think is laudable. It's exactly what should take place. The goal of preventing him from speaking is a completely different one. I would also argue that just practically, it's an absolute disaster. Practically, it's going to backfire and make his ideas more attractive and give him the allure of the forbidden, which, and I actually think in many cases the extremes tend to feed upon each other, and this is exactly what's happened between the far right and the far left, because the more the far right is seen as being the forbidden, as striking back against the authorities, the more attractive it becomes, and then that simply feeds upon, that enables the far left to make the case that you just made, that see they're growing in power, we must shut them down, we must oppose them. So I think it makes it all the more imperative for people in the center to try to make these important distinctions.
Mukund, Heather, Jonathan, stand by. Lots of callers for all three of you. Adam in Milford, Connecticut. Adam, you're on the air. Thank you for calling.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
I definitely, I'm a Connecticut liberal. I find the things that Milo and Richard Spencer say to be appalling, but I also find the goal of shutting down their speech to be just as appalling, if not more, because I don't think they have great ideas. I don't think they would stand up to debate. I think they should get those ideas out there so that people can debate against them, prove them wrong, and I don't think they have such great ideas that they're going to convert a whole lot of people if they are allowed to speak at a college campus.
So let them speak. Let the contest of ideas unfold. Adam, we've got it, and I appreciate your call. Nashville, Tennessee. Spencer, thank you for calling. You're on.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to decide, what I'm trying to get at is that these people like Milo and Richard Spencer, they don't fall into the same freedom of speech that the rest of people do, because they're pushing these violent, hateful, sexist, racist, homophobic ideologies, and these are dangerous. I mean, with all of Donald Trump's things coming up in the election and through his presidency, we saw a gross increase in hate crime. These speeches that they're giving, these ideas that they're putting out there, don't exist in a vacuum. They influence people. People will pick that up, and I'm certain college students will hear these racist messages and pick up on things like that because it seems like it's standing up against
But
them.
where do you draw the line, Spencer? If you say, no, that's too much, well, what if someone's a little less offensive and then a little less offensive to you? I mean, where do you draw the line and decide who should be able to speak and who shouldn't?
That's for the people in the community to decide. If the people at Berkeley didn't think that Milo Yiannopoulos was enough, then they wouldn't have showed up in the droves that they did to stop him.
But if it's a community standard and you went to somewhere in the South in 1959 and talked about civil rights, you might have been shut down violently there. Would that have been right?
No. And I mean, that happened all the time. And still, here we are now. We've made great progress, and where we are, where in the end, the Klan and things like that, these racist organizations, they got shut down.
Okay, we've got all kinds of stripes of response here, and I appreciate your call, Spencer, from Nashville. I'm Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point. We'll be right back.
Support for this podcast and the following message comes from ZipRecruiter, who understands when you run a business, you've got important decisions to make every day, like hiring. ZipRecruiter makes finding quality candidates simple. With one click at ZipRecruiter.com/OP, you can post your job to 100 leading job sites across the web and manage your candidates all in one place with ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use dashboard. Find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by businesses of all sizes to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/OP.
I'm Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point. We're talking this hour about free speech and the American college campus. Whose voices can be heard? Whose voices are being rejected or resisted? And the debate over what is right here. You can join us. What do you think? Is college the place where you're just supposed to hear everything? What if students think it's racist, sexist? What if students think it's fascist and ultimately a threat to academic freedom, our society itself? Do they have a responsibility to stand up and say, hell no, not here? Are these students who say no too fragile, too thin-skinned, too lost in their own politics? Where do you come down on this? Let anyone speak or draw lines? Heather McDonald is with us. She ran into trouble trying to talk at Claremont McKenna and UCLA, met with protests there. She's a fellow at the Manhattan Institute, conservative in New York. Jonathan Chait's with us from Washington today, writer for New York Magazine, no conservative, author of Audacity, How Barack Obama Defied His Critics and Created a Legacy That Will Prevail. Mukund Rati is with us. He's a student at the University of California, Berkeley Law School, helped organize protests against Milo Yiannopoulos there and has been very outspoken about it. You can link to some of what he's written at our website, onpointradio.org. There is a context for this. Here was an ad from President Trump's 2016 campaign. It speaks directly to the whole issue of political correctness in the United States.
I have a great education. I went to an Ivy League college, but I'm not politically correct because to be politically correct just takes too much time. It takes too much effort. We have to get things done in this country, and you're never going to get it done if we just stay politically correct.
Yeah, and then there's been lots of criticism from the right of these students as snowflakes, like too fragile to take it. They'll break, they'll melt. This is in January on the show The Blaze. Conservative political commentator Tommy Lauren explained what it means to be a snowflake. Her lights.
If you think someone else, like taxpayers, should pay for your college tuition or your student loans, you might be a snowflake. By that same token, if you think by virtue of you attending college, you should get a high-paying job with flexible hours and a month of vacation and the ability to wear your sweatpants, your see-through leggings to work, you might be a snowflake. Okay, snowflake. That's the epithet being tossed out there. Charles Murray really got some rough handling when he went to Middlebury in Vermont. Phil Hoxie was at the American Enterprise Institution Club. They invited him to speak there, and he talked with Vermont's WPTZ News, saying the invitation was not an endorsement of Murray's politics, he said, but a chance for Republicans to learn.
I really think his work coming apart is incredibly important for understanding Donald Trump and understanding the forces at play that brought that movement together. And as, a Republican, I don't understand this movement enough.
And he wanted to hear it. It didn't end up really happening. Charles Murray having to kind of run for safety out of there. Auburn, Richard Spencer ended up speaking. A court said he had to be allowed to speak. Here's a student, Preston Hall, telling the student newspaper last week that he supported Spencer's right, this is the white supremacist, his right to free speech, but he thought it was still important to protest to show, he said, alt-right supporters they would not have the final word.
They're trying to make a lot of people feel unsafe, uneasy, maybe trying to start something. And we just want to be out here to let them know that they're not going to be able to sway us or to change what we think.
Mukund Rati, student in Berkeley, California, UC Berkeley Law School. What about the snowflake epithet? Are you a snowflake? Are protesters snowflakes, Mukund?
So I think it's worth giving some historical context. Was Martin Luther King Jr. a snowflake when he rolled into Birmingham and used civil disobedience along with hundreds of residents, thousands of students to fight against segregation? Was Mario Savio a snowflake when he led the free speech movement at UC Berkeley and said that if the university was going to try to clamp down on student speech, students needed to shut down Sproul Plaza? All of the historical movements that we look to as models for social movements for people's rights and against oppression, this same argument has been made at every juncture, that the people are just looking for special treatment. You can find very many condescending Southern screeds about why black people should not have been demonstrating in cities like Birmingham. And so when Jonathan Chait makes the argument that we should find a distinction between, shutting down debate and instead we should have reasoned argument, I think it's worth him revisiting texts, famous political texts like Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, where he argued specifically against this, the idea that social change will come solely through reasoned debate. In fact, he argued that this kind of white moderate view was incompatible with the long history of oppression of black people in the U.S., and that because of that, it was necessary to use civil disobedience. It was necessary to sit in at lunch counters. And the same thing applies in Berkeley. I mean, the free speech movement began because students were going on and off campus to protest against segregation in California, the fact that black people were being relegated to lower occupations. And it was because of those protests that the university clamped down on free speech. And it was a reaction to that the free speech movement came into being.
Mukund, hold the thought. Jonathan Chait, what do you say to that line of criticism here?
I mean, again, that is a completely absurd reading of what King was for and what the civil rights movement was for. They were not for eliminating the civil rights of their opponents. They were for forms of political expression. Civil disobedience is a form of political expression, and they were for fundamentally changing the mind of the country. So the idea that Martin Luther King was attempting to stop people who disagreed with him from expressing their ideas at all is completely ahistorical.
Do you see
And I certainly didn't argue that. That's absolutely not what I'm arguing.
The tactic that we're discussing. Again, this is exactly what I said the first time. What people on the left try to do is blend together different tactics so they can use the defensible one to cover the indefensible one. The defensible ones are registering dissent and making your own forms of expression. The indefensible ones are stopping your opponents from expressing their own ideas. And what you did in your first comment and what you've done again here just now is to blend these two together. So as soon as someone says, I'm against you stopping someone else from speaking, you say, but really what we want to do is speak ourselves. I
disagree. I actually think, Jonathan, it's you that's blending together the two lines of argument. I mean, when you write about the protest against Milo Yiannopoulos at Berkeley, you don't make a distinction between the 2,000 angry students who were there to vigorously register their dissent and the minority of people who broke windows and started fires. You used the riots that were started to blame the entire student population at Berkeley that was protesting. So it's you that needs to be making that distinction.
That's the entire key to what I'm talking about.
Jonathan, I don't know if this is relevant exactly. It's dicey territory, but do you see a generational change, an attitudinal change, something different about this younger generation that draws this epithet snowflake?
I don't really like the label, the epithet.
No, I don't like it at all. I just wonder.
When I was in college, you had an upsurge of political correctness. You had speech codes on campus, and you had a real fashion for this left-wing view of stopping speech that they disagreed with, and it went away. You're seeing another upsurge of it. It's hard to say exactly why it's happened, and it's hard to say whether it's going to stay. But again, it's something that's happening, and I think people who are liberal do need to identify it and try to speak out against it.
Heather, I want to come to you. Let me get one call first. Lexi in Milwaukee. Lexi, thank you for calling. You're on the air.
Hi, Tom. I recently graduated from Fordham University, which was one of the schools that Ann Coulter ended up not speaking at. Okay. In that case, the college Republicans had a discussion with our president and came to the conclusion that she did not follow our Jesuit values, and they disinvited her themselves. But my comment is, I think where you draw the line of free speech and debate on college campuses is whether the speaker is going to contribute to the intellectual debate, the intellectual discussion. Are they going to cite peer-reviewed research and have facts behind them, or are they just going to spew vitriol? People like Richard Spencer shouldn't be allowed on campuses because they're not adding to the debate. They're not intellectuals. I don't think they would stand the rigor of being allowed to be a professor or lecturer.
So you have to be credentialed to have free speech? If you don't have the right credentials?
No, you don't have to have the credentials, but you have to have the ability to cite facts and cite peer-reviewed research. If you're not going to be able to have facts that back up your opinions, they're just opinions. And if those opinions are just hate-filled vitriol, there's really no use or purpose for them on a college campus.
So you would have Ann Coulter or not then? You would have supported her speaking or not, Lexi?
She could have been allowed to speak on campus. I respect that the college Republicans decided that she did not represent their views of conservatism as students at Fordham University. But if they hadn't disinvited her, I think she should have been allowed to speak. But
where's the line? I mean, Ann Coulter's out there. Ann Coulter has said, quote, if we took away women's right to vote, we'd never have to worry about another Democrat president. It's a kind of a pipe dream. It's a personal fantasy of mine. Quote, she said, I've never understood the argument we're going to war for oil. We need oil. We shouldn't. Why shouldn't we go to war for oil? We need it. Drop a nuke, daisy cutter, it doesn't matter. So someone could look at that and say, well, that's vitriolic. But so how do you decide?
I think it's up to the college Republicans and the college Democrats and the political departments that are inviting these speakers to make the decisions for themselves. But I just don't think that they should be inviting people such as Richard Spencer, Milo Yiannopoulos, or Ann Coulter because they're not contributing to the intellectual discussion. Invite people like Colin Powell and John McCain, people who can defend their ideas with facts and research. Don't invite people who are just making up their own opinions for no reason.
Lexi, we've got it. Heather McDonald, respond to Lexi in Milwaukee, if you would.
Well, I find it amazing that we have, on the one hand, a ideology that is very prevalent on campuses today that is telling a larger and larger group of students that they are victims, that they are victimized by the endemic and deep racism, sexism, homophobia that is part and parcel of the American experience, and is giving them privilege based on their alleged victim status, and they proudly claim themselves to be marginalized. And yet these are the same students that are exercising what is really brute power over other people. They are seizing the authority to decide, again, not just who gets to speak, but who gets to hear other people's speech. When people tried successfully to shut me down at Claremont McKenna, the students of color at Claremont colleges sent out a manifesto that said, we stand against all forms of oppression and we refuse to have McDonald speak. Well, that is internally contradictory. The whole genius of the American Constitution was that it was anti-majoritarian, and what we heard from one of your callers, Spencer, was a real indication of the failure of civic education in this country when he said, well, it's for the people to decide, of the community, who gets to speak. No, the First Amendment is an individual right against the mob. And but the lack of historical understanding, something that Jonathan Chait has brought out, is that groups that have tried to fight back against majority power have been utterly dependent upon and grateful for their First Amendment speech rights. I would advise Mr. Mukund and the people who agree with him to read Frederick Douglass's 1860 essay, A Plea for Free Speech in Boston. He said slavery cannot tolerate free speech. Historically, it has been the power of the, in fact, marginalized that are allowed to enter the public arena through their speech. And now those same people are assuming unto themselves an uncontestable power to silence others. And ironically, they go under the name of anti-fascists. I don't want to adopt the same maudlin hyperbole that the left uses to defend itself these days, but it needs to be said that when you see students breaking windows, sucker punching purported believed foes, whether they're Trump supporters or Milo supporters, things start to look uncomfortably in the direction of 1920s and 1930s Germany. This is a betrayal of what this country stands for, and it is, I think, really a direct outgrowth of what is a false victimology ideology that is taking over college campuses.
Well, we've got an eye of the beholder issue here that is enormous. Let me go to Gilbert in Asheville, North Carolina. Gilbert, thank you for calling. What do you think?
Thank you very much for allowing me an opportunity to offer an opinion. Free speech is a very important part of our life in our United States. It's a cornerstone of many of the things that we stand for. It would be, I believe, dangerous not to allow people to have an opportunity to speak. If we start limiting the people on campus or anywhere, if we start limiting who speaks and who says what, I think we're setting a dangerous precedence, because then at some point, my opinions, if I'm against everybody that has an opposite opinion of mine, at some point I may wake up one day and find out that my opinions are being oppressed, and it has run this thing of, we need to stop people from speaking has run away with us. By all means, let's get outside. Let's protest in front of wherever this person is speaking. But no matter how we feel about that particular individual, whether we think...
Gilbert, let me put it to you. I think I've got your point, but my notes here say you're a Native American. What if it's a white supremacist? How do you feel about it in that case, given history, given everything?
Sure, given the history, but listen, were my people oppressed in the past? Of course they were. How does that bear on my life today? I was able to get a good education. I was able to hold a good job. I don't agree with the white supremacists and what they have to say, but by the same token, who am I to say that they can't speak? Those opinions have to be heard. And I believe one of your callers said, let people decide. There is, a problem with allowing people to decide, but that's how we do things in this United States. The majority should, just like we voted in a president that I don't like, but the majority of my fellow citizens voted for him, enough people that he got elected. Who am I now to say, well, we should have stopped that?
Gilbert, we're going to give you the last word today. Native American Gilbert calling in from Asheville, North Carolina, to say he would extend free speech to a white supremacist. That is old school. There's a new school afoot as well. Unresolved issues here, but really interesting to hear them hashed out today, and I'm grateful to all three of my guests for helping us do that. Mukund Ratti at University of California, Berkeley Law School. Mukund, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Tom.
Jonathan Chait at New York Magazine. Thanks as always, Jonathan.
Thank you very much.
And Heather McDonald at the Manhattan Institute. Same to you, Heather. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
I'm Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point.